up, like one of our wonderful volunteers said earlier, we do not typically have to use these interventions at the shelter, right? The Narcan we've never had to use, luckily, in the center before, but we do these trainings as a way to be prepared in case that event does happen, right? So with de-escalation training, know that most of the time our guests come in after a long day and they just want to sleep. But there are some times where we do have to use these skills. And I want you to keep in mind, particularly, that the folks that we are working with are actively in trauma. So they are experiencing, a lot of them, the hardest period of their lives. And so when you are in trauma, your ability to process information is limited by the trauma that you are experiencing at that moment. So what we say always is that we volunteer in pairs. We're never alone in the center, and for good reason, right? We have a partner that we work with for situational awareness, for safety at all times. If something doesn't feel right, pay attention. We trust you as a volunteer. We trust your instincts. And always communicate with your partner when you're on shift. Hey, if something does happen, who would be the person that would like to respond to it? Who would be the person that would like to call 911? And so making that plan with your partner is important. Knowing that our interaction with our guests is what gives us authority. Our relationship that we build with them is what really gives us the authority in the center, right? We have the authority actually to kick folks out, but how they respond to us, how our guests interact with us really depends on those relationships that we build with them. And so when we greet our guests, we're making eye contact, we're building that relationship with them. A lot of our guests spend their day feeling invisible, like they're not seen or heard, and having that connection to somebody is vital. When we're perceived as helpful, collaborative, and professional, and impartial, we tend to be listened to a little bit more than when we come across as authoritative or hard-nosed, right? And I'm gonna put a caveat in there. If there's a safety concern, we absolutely expect you to be that, right? Hold those firm boundaries. But when we're interacting on a daily basis, we want to be coming across as helpful. We want to be coming across as collaborative with these folks. If we're uptight, entitled, or unprofessional, we're going to most likely be ignored or resisted. So developing that situational awareness, taking a break and a pause unless safety is an immediate concern, to just get a feel for the scene around you. We start by doing nothing, and that doesn't mean that we don't intervene when needed, right? But we take a step back, we stop, think, pause, and act, right? We take that breath to get an understanding of what's going on around us. If you decide after observing what's going on that your presence is going to be helpful in the situation, be engaged with that situation, right? Come up gently. And if you can, help guests to solve problems on their own rather than coming in with solutions for them. If necessary, to remind them that, hey, you're here to sleep for the night. It's cold outside, sometimes it's snowing. Odds are most of our guests do not want to be out on the streets in that, and we don't want them to be out on the streets. And reminding them that they're just here to sleep for the night. You are always welcome to call 911, and if there's a situation that you feel is hazardous to yourself, your partner, the guests around you, call 911. Our sheriff's office works very closely with us. They partner with us hand in hand, and our officers have been trained in crisis de-escalation. So we partner with them. We have had to call them at the center before, and I have never had a deputy be unprofessional when they arrive. They want our guests to stay in the center as much as possible. So if you call 911 and let's say the situation de-escalates before they get here, great job. You're never going to get in trouble for calling 911. When we volunteer in partners, we're also always keeping track of our partner, right? This is also a safety and preventative measure. Hey, partner, I'm going to go use the restroom. Hey, partner, I'm going to go walk around for a little bit and just check out the area. Keeping tabs on each other is for the safety of yourself, but also safety for our guests as well. So remember, when you're approaching a potentially hazardous situation, time's on your side, unless there's an immediate safety concern. Take a step back, observe what's going on. Is the scene safe? If it's not safe or you feel uncomfortable approaching that situation, it's okay to call 911. If medical assistance is needed, always call 911, right? Know that when you approach a situation, again, we're approaching it from a lens of trauma. When we talk about the trauma brain and how that works, we talk about fight, flight, or freeze, which most of us have heard of before, right? And when we're experiencing folks who are in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, any perceived threat is going to continue to escalate that situation because they're not able to access that thinking and reasoning portion of their brain at that time. So we approach the situation low and slow, both in our demeanor and our body language, right? We approach the situation and we stand off to the side. We don't approach it directly in their face, looking over them. We are making that nice, gentle eye contact and allowing them to feel that there is an escape route at all times if they need it. Come up and introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Molly. I'm a volunteer with NOTS. I don't think I've ever met you before. What's your name? Make that eye contact and ask them for permission if it's okay to come into their space. Hey, is it okay if I come on over and talk to you right now? Know that if somebody says no, oftentimes they might not be feeling safe with themselves, and it's a way for them to keep you safe in that moment. Respect personal space. Feeling trapped evokes that stress response, right? It heightens their sense of danger. Remain out of arm's length and or legs length, right? And speak calmly and casually, low and slow. Slow down the pace. It helps the situation from feeling, it helps the person from feeling like they're being overwhelmed in that situation. If you're trying all of these tactics and they're still escalated and you feel that there's a safety concern, back away and call 911 or have your partner call 911. So remember, we have a whole spectrum of interventions at our disposal, right? We start with gently observing, doing nothing, introducing ourselves, sometimes even a simple request, right? Hey, I'm sorry to bug you. Are you doing okay? Could you do me a favor? Could you come help me with this really quickly? I really need help taking out this trash. It's a little bit too heavy for me. And sometimes that request snaps folks out of what's going on with them. Always, if you can, and again, if safety is not a concern, offer a choice. Hey, I hear what you're saying, but you should know that if this situation continues to escalate, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And then as things are going, those de-escalation strategies aren't working, you can start getting direct with your requests, right? Hey, I need you to stop doing that. Absolutely stop doing that. I need you to back out. I need you to leave, and just telling them to stop, and you're out for the night. So there's a whole range of interventions that you as a volunteer are allowed to use at your discretion. Okay? Remember, we're always considering safety as a top priority. So that's my very brief de-escalation training in there. Did anybody have any questions?
One thing that comes up quite frequently is mental health issues, and sometimes people are hearing voices and they're talking to those voices, and they can be a little disruptive because it's waking up other people, and they're maybe in an agitated talking to the voices, not in anybody else.
Yeah.
And Deacon Craig gave me some advice last year about an individual, that sometimes just talking to them kind of snaps them out of their whatever they're going through. If you do it in a nice, gentle voice, and it can de-escalate them into not listening to the voices at that time, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that happens quite often.
Yeah, and I'm going to repeat that too, because that's really important information, and so the folks on the live stream can hear that. So sometimes we do have folks who present with several mental health concerns, right? And some are talking to folks that may not be there, right? They hear voices in their heads. And that's where this de-escalation piece becomes really important, right? Making that eye contact, if you know their name, saying their name in a gentle tone, right? And also, reminding yourself that what they're going through for them is very real in that moment, right? They're not necessarily understanding that how they're responding is not typical of the situation. And so making that eye contact, saying their name, saying, hey, I hear that you're a little frustrated. Would you like to take a step outside for a minute and just give yourself some time to cool off? And most of the time, even that just direct eye contact and saying their name is enough to kind of bring them back and help them self-regulate. So that's a very good point. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay.
Oh, question.
Yeah.
So again, along those same lines, sometimes people are having nightmares, and they're very. Is there anything that because you're afraid that, you know, if they're having a nightmare, they may come back out, you know, so any suggestions there?
Yeah, and that's another good point. So again, we're talking about trauma, and so a lot of times our guests in the middle of the night will have nightmares. They will make noises. Sometimes they yell or scream in the middle of the night, and that is out of their control. Oftentimes in those situations, especially if they're waking up other guests, right, you don't want to necessarily wake them up because they are agitated in that moment. But that's why we have earplugs in the center too, right? So I've distributed earplugs before. If that person is coming in and out of sleep and they're starting to wake up, I will approach bedside, again, out of arms and legs length, and just check in. Hey, are you doing okay? Do you want to come have a cup of coffee at the table with me, and let's talk about what's going on with you today? So just monitor if they're waking up, coming in and out of that state, like, you know, approaching them from that perspective of kindness and caring about what's going on with them. But also, you can start distributing earplugs to folks who might start waking up from being disturbed by that. And then I think I had another question.
Well, it's a comment more than anything else. In my previous times, the guests, sometimes people bring in hats, coats, warm gloves, warm socks, and the guests are free to take whatever they want without question. And there's also tea, coffee, and water provided. They're not allowed to have that in the sleeping area. There's a table in the sign-in area, and that's where they're allowed to have food, drink, or whatever. And of course, never any gloves. No weapon comes into that.
Yeah. So the comment was on just some of the general rules of, you know, what folks are allowed to bring in and what they're allowed to take away from them at the center. And we are going to be going over that in just a little bit in the main portion when Jody comes up here. So, okay. Any other questions about crisis or de-escalation? Okay. All right, if there are any other questions that come up later, just let me know. I know I went really, really quickly through that. I am going to get into a very brief suicide prevention portion of the training because, again, we are working with folks in trauma. And so this does come up every once in a while. Remember that experiencing homelessness is an intense and traumatic experience. As volunteers, we sometimes come across folks who are in need of immediate medical attention for thoughts of suicide. And I want to be very clear, it's not our job to judge whether or not that person is having genuine thoughts of suicide. It is our job to connect them to care. Oftentimes we'll hear folks say, oh, well, that person was just in Mallory and they just want to get back to Mallory. That's not our responsibility to make that determination. That's for EMS or another emergency responder to decide. So some warning signs that someone might be experiencing thoughts of suicide: sense of hopelessness, no hope for the future, isolation, feeling alone. The hardest one of this is aggressiveness and irritability. So when folks are acting out in a way to isolate themselves, feeling like a burden to others, they have a drastic change in their mood or behavior. Frequently talking about death, self-harm, cutting and burning. Again, self-harm does not necessarily indicate thoughts of suicide, but it can be a warning sign of it. Engaging in risky behaviors, making funeral arrangements, giving things away. This is a big one, and I also caution you to pay attention that what somebody deems as valuable to them might be considered junk to us. So when they're giving away things that are of sentimental value to them, that can be a warning sign. Substance abuse, making threats of suicide, and having a general negative self-view and view of the world. Okay. So it is absolutely okay to ask a person experiencing thoughts of suicide if they are having suicide ideation, if they are thinking of ending their lives. All of the research and data show that that will never put the thought of suicide in their heads. Odds are if you ask them and they say yes, that thought has been there for a long time already. There's some questions that you can ask, indirect or direct questions, right? And you're going to base it on your comfort level. So some indirect questions are, do you wish you could go to sleep and not wake up? Do you wish that you were dead? And direct questions can include, like, have you had thoughts about killing yourself? Have you had thoughts of suicide? Are you having those thoughts right now? Have you had thoughts about killing yourself recently? If you're concerned that that person is a safety risk to themselves or others, call 911. Again, we're not making that judgment, and unless you hold a clinical license or are currently working in crisis management, it's not our job to make that determination. You're going to call 911 and stay with the person until help arrives, and discourage them from walking away or using the restroom. Oftentimes when I have this conversation with folks, they have to use the restroom right away. I want to use the bathroom before EMS gets here, and gently discourage them from doing that until they arrive. Reassure the person you care about them and thank them for trusting you with that information. It is a huge deal for somebody to be able to open up and tell you the truth about what's going on with them. If the person is upset that you're calling 911, and sometimes this does happen, right, reassure them that you care, that you would rather see them alive and be able to talk to them tomorrow, and it's okay that they're upset with you. Tell them that you care about their safety and well-being. If a person is upset enough to the point where they walk away and leave the center, just take note of some, general descriptions, right? What they're wearing, what they look like, look at their name and date of birth. And then when you're calling 911, give them just kind of a general direction that that person is headed. So some things that might happen after you call 911, an assessment might be done. Usually when we're calling at the center, it's going to be in the hours where most of our crisis response workers are not working. So usually it'll be a deputy that responds and does a quick crisis assessment. After they do that crisis assessment, the individual might be placed on what's called a legal hold for 72 hours and brought to either the hospital ER, Reno Behavioral or Mallory Crisis Center. And the individual might be also referred for follow-up services and supports. 988 is a fantastic 24/7 service that is available to anyone and everyone. You can call, text, or they can even use it on a computer. And if you would like 988 to do that assessment, you can just call 988 and they will talk with that person directly. Another really great resource is the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. The Columbia is actually a free resource. You can get training for free online, and it is a scoring tool. They even have an app that you can use for it, and it tells you what risk level that person is at as well. All right, that was my very brief training on that. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you guys so much.